and show the agenda on the screen, Joe? Maybe zoom in a little bit if you can. Does anybody have changes to the agenda for today? All right. Seeing no hands, hearing nothing, then the agenda is approved. And then we have the meeting minutes from our last meeting. Can you pull those up, Joe? Okay. And can I get a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
Motion to approve, Robert Ellis.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second, Joel with Anoka.
Thank you. Any discussion on the meeting minutes? Okay, seeing none, Joe, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Anoka County, McPherson.
Aye.
Carver County, Robgent. Or anybody else from Carver County? Okay, Dakota County, Labrie.
Aye.
Hennepin County, Ellos. Or anybody else? Okay, Ramsey County, Isaacson.
Mareck for Isaacson, aye.
Scott County, Jensen.
Aye.
Washington County, Leitner.
Aye.
7W, Witter. Tab, Kotsukos.
Aye.
Council MTS, Steve Peterson.
Aye.
Council Community Development, Michael Larson.
Aye.
Metro Transit, Harrington.
Aye.
NDOT Metro, Crockett.
Aye.
MPCA, AO.
Aye.
MAC, Reef.
Aye.
STA, Matt Fighton.
Aye.
I saw you. Fighton. MnDOT Freight, Parthi. Deed, Eddie.
Aye.
DNR is still vacant. Bike Representative, Sabota.
Aye.
Pedestrian, Turner Bargain. Met Cities, Bloomington, Keel.
Aye.
Chanhassen, Howley.
Aye.
Lakeville, Omi.
Aye.
Eden Prairie, Ellis.
Aye.
Ridley, Kazlucher.
Aye.
Maple Grove, Ashfield.
Aye.
Plymouth, Thompson.
Aye.
West St. Paul, Beckwith.
Aye.
Minneapolis Engineering, Hager.
Aye.
Minneapolis Planning, Lowell. Oh no, sorry. Mayo.
Aye.
St. Paul Engineering, Peterson.
Aye.
And Planning, Dermody, St. Paul.
Aye.
That is it.
Okay, the meeting minutes are approved. Thank you. Is there anyone here from the public to comment on committee business today?
No, sorry.
Seeing none. All right, then tab report, Elaine.
Thank you, Chair. TAB met on February 15th, a couple weeks ago. Chair Hovland reported that the executive committee met and discussed the new IIJA and grant opportunities that we can take advantage of as a region. They discussed having the consultant at MnDOT present on those opportunities. And there was also discussion that possibly setting aside some of the regional solicitation funds, similar to how they're set aside for the innovation funds for the unique projects, for these types of grant opportunities. And if they're not used, roll it back into the solicitation. Chair Hovland welcomed the new tab members and alternates. Tab executive also had approved the first vice chair is Mark Winshuttle and second vice chair is Trista Metacastillo. And then the tab liaison will continue to be Peter Dugan. The tab report, Michael Barnes reported on the quarters of commerce funding. The packages submitted are getting their final cost estimates and support letters, and these are due March 1st, which is today. The projects will be evaluated and announcements made in May for the $200 million in funding, half of which will go to the metro area. And then also there have been about 20 fatalities this year, which is a couple fewer than last year at this time. And that was as a couple weeks ago. In the Metropolitan Airports Commission report, Carl Crimmins reported on the airport numbers. In 2022, there were over 32 million passengers. And for international passengers, there was a large increase, comparing 740,000 in 2021 and over 2 million in 2022. For the Metropolitan Council report, Deb Barber reported that the Met Council has begun listening sessions in the community for the transportation policy plan. And she also provided an update on ridership and that noted that rides are increasing. Council member finalists have been forwarded to the governor for appointment by March 6th. For the Suburban Transit Association, Gary Hansen reported that Southwest Transit is partnering with Lyft to provide on-demand services within an app environment, and this is nearing implementation. MBTA is finalizing a raised grant application for the Burnsville Transit Station Mobility Hub project, and they've kicked off discussions with Dakota County Technical College around a dedicated route concept, a workforce development partnership, and on-site electric bus infrastructure. And Jeni Hager reported on the TAC report, mentioning that the Funding and Programming Committee will be reviewing the scope change policy, which was last updated 10 years ago. And for the action items, TAB approved the items that came through the TAC for the performance targets for the PM2 and PM3, the streamlined tip amendments for the 3 new projects, and then the 3 scope changes and cost changes. They also approved the 3 program year extensions, the Hennepin County Midtown Greenway, Hennepin County Vernon Avenue Bridge Program, and the St. Paul Kellogg Bridge Replacement. They also approved the 2 scope changes, one for MnDOT Trunk Highway 13, Cable Barrier Medium, and the St. Paul Fish Hatchery Trail. And then they received information on the Transportation Policy Program update. And there was a question from a TAB member about the integration of the performance measures. And Chair Hovland noted the importance of engaging the private sector. And Carl Crimmins mentioned that through the airport at MSP, they have over 236,000 metric tons of freight moving through the roads to get that to MSP, and that should be considered. For the regional solicitation update, C. Peterson presented on this item. Members asked about constituent needs and brought up the need for a theory of change and mechanisms presented. One member asked for scoring metrics to be presented in their relevant connection. And one member asked for staff to look at a minimal performance standard. Part of this was as part of the last solicitation with the increase of funding available for distribution. We went down the list quite a bit to select projects, and they wanted to review this. And then there was a question on whether TAB had heard anything about a change for the open meeting law. As of yet, the legislature has not made any significant changes to that. And that's all I have for my report.
Thank you, Elaine. Are there any questions for Elaine on the TAB report? Okay, seeing none, then I will report that the executive committee did meet this morning, and we discussed the items on the agenda today, including the 2 streamlined tip amendments that Joe will describe here in a second. And then we spent a little bit of time talking about the information item that will be later on in the agenda today for potential changes to the 2024 regional solicitation. And with that, Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you to go through 2023-16, which is a package of streamlined tip amendments for different projects. For the committee's benefit, we are trying out packaging these tip amendments, and for this month, they're packaged according to ones that already existed in the tip, and we're making some changes to those, minor administrative level changes. And then the second one being something that would be new to the tip. So if there's any feedback from the committee on that, we're open to hearing that. It will help minimize the number of voice votes that we're taking each meeting if we can package these. So with that, Joe, 2023-16.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we seem to be getting a lot of tip amendment requests, and so from meeting to meeting, we might talk about how to group them or if to group them. But here we have 4 tip amendment requests that are existing projects that are undergoing what we consider fairly minor changes. So I'll just talk about them one at a time by showing the info at the time. So this 3 of them happen to be on US 169, but not particularly near each other. That's really a coincidence as far as I can tell. So this first one, MnDOT's requesting a cost increase for its US 169 cable median barrier and drainage project from Blakely Township to Belle Plaine, along with a correction to the project length. So this change to project length you see is really just a correction of an error. And the project is funded with state funds and HSIP funds, but those HSIP funds are not funds funded through the solicitation process to whatever degree that would matter. So again, it's just a cost increase and technical correction. And here it is on a map. The second one is MnDOT requesting a small reduction to the length and addition of scope in the form of TMS, Transportation Management Systems, to its US 169 mill and overlay project. It's funded through the National Highway Performance Program, or NHPP, which is not a regional solicitation program. Move down, here it is on a map. Third, MnDOT requesting an increase to its US 169 bridge replacement at 6th Avenue in Brooklyn Park in Maple Grove, and it's a state-funded project and includes no regional solicitation funding. And again, it's just I think you're going to see some funding increases this year given some of the inflation that's occurred. And here it is on a map as a spot. And finally, not MnDOT, it's Hennepin County, and they're requesting a cost increase to their University Avenue and 4th Street bikeway project. I'll show that in a map. The project was funded in the 2018 regional solicitation, and all additional funds are local. You can see the FHWA amount is not changing. So with that, I'd stand for questions about the process or about any of the individual projects.
Okay, I'll open up to questions for Joe from committee members, and just an administrative thing for everyone. If you want to raise your hand and speak or make a motion, if you could introduce your name and which agency you're with. We have several newer members that would benefit from just kind of learning who's who and where your work or what agency you're representing. Excuse me. Are there any questions for Joe? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Madam Chair, this is Joe with Anoka County. I make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Joe. Is there a second?
Second, Brian Isaacson, Ramsey County.
Thank you, Brian. Any discussion on this item from committee members? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye by roll call. Joe?
Oh, he's on mute, I think.
Oh, Joe, are you muted? Here we go. I unmuted you.
Anoka County, McPherson, you were ready too.
Aye.
Carver County, Robjent, are you here yet? Okay, Dakota County, Labrie.
Aye.
Hennepin County, Ellos.
Aye.
Ramsey County, Isaacson.
Aye.
Scott County, Jensen.
Aye.
Washington County, Leitner.
Aye.
7W, Witter. Tab Coordinator, Elaine Kotsukos.
Aye.
MTS Planning, Steve Peterson.
Aye.
Met Council Community Development, Michael Larson.
Aye.
Metro Transit, Adam Harrington.
Aye.
MnDOT Metro, April Crockett.
Aye.
MPCA, Innocent AO.
Aye.
MAC, Bridget Reef.
Aye.
Suburban Transit, Matt Fighton.
Aye.
MnDOT Freight, Pravina Padarthi. Deed, Colleen Eddy.
Aye.
There is vacant. Bicycle Representative Kyle Sabota.
Aye.
Pedestrian Representative Mackenzie Turner Bargan.
Aye.
Met Cities Bloomington, Carl Keel.
Aye.
Chanhassen, Charlie Howley.
Aye.
Lakeville, Paul Omi.
Aye.
Eden Prairie, Robert Ellis.
Aye.
Ridley, Jim Kozlucher.
Aye.
Maple Grove, Ken Ashfield.
Aye.
Plymouth, Michael Thompson.
Aye.
West St. Paul, Ross Beckwith.
Aye.
Minneapolis Engineering, Jeni Hager.
Aye.
Minneapolis Planning, Kathleen Mayell.
Aye.
St. Paul Engineering, Nick Peterson.
Aye.
And St. Paul Planning, Bill Dermody.
Aye.
That item carries and is approved. Thank you. And then we have another streamlined tip amendment, 2023-17, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. This one isn't all that complicated, but it is a new project, which sort of breaks the pattern of those other 4 projects, and is also unusual in one sense. So this is a project being, I should say, a tip amendment being requested by Chisago County, which we don't see every day at TAC. And the reason for that is that MnDOT, or is that Chisago County has a project on US Highway 8 right now. I'll just go to the description, which is a expansion of a 2-lane road, undivided roadway to a 4-lane roadway. And what they're doing is extending the project into a reconstruction of about 8 miles, and that's proposed to go into Washington County. Therefore, the project, while in the STIP, because it was already in the STIP, does need to be added to the TIP because it now enters our planning region. So they're proposing an extension of the project here in Washington County. It's not a roadway expansion. It's just a reconstruction, and therefore it's a streamlined TIP amendment, but it does need to be included in the TIP. And so it's a kind of an unusual request, but it's actually not all that complex as it turns out. So with that, I'd stand for questions.
Are there any questions for Joe on 2023-17? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Keel moves to approve.
Thank you, Carl. A second.
Madam Chair, this is Joe with Anoka County. I'll second that.
Thank you, Joe. Is there any discussion from committee members on this item? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye by roll call. Joe?
Anoka County, McPherson.
Aye.
Joe McPherson. Dakota County, Aaron Labrie.
Aye.
Hennepin County, Chad Ellos.
Aye.
Ramsey County, Brian Isaacson.
Aye.
Scott County, Craig Jensen.
Aye.
Washington County, Alyssa Leitner.
Aye.
7W, Andrew Witter. Oh, you haven't been here. Never mind. Tab, Elaine Kotsukos.
Aye.
Met Council MTS, Steve Peterson.
Aye.
Met Council Community Development, Michael Larson.
Aye.
Metro Transit, Adam Harrington.
Aye.
MnDOT Metro, April Crockett.
Aye.
MPCA, Innocent AO.
Aye.
MAC, Bridget Reef.
Aye.
Suburban Transit, Matt Fighton.
Aye.
MnDOT Freight, you haven't been here. Deed, Colleen Eddy.
Aye.
Bicycle Representative Kyle Sabota.
Aye.
Pedestrian Representative Mackenzie Turner Bargan.
Aye.
Met Cities Bloomington, Carl Keel,
Aye.
Chanhassen Charlie Howley,
Aye.
Lakefield Paul Omi,
Aye.
Eden Prairie Robert Ellis,
Aye.
Ridley Jim Kozlucher,
Aye.
Maple Grove Ken Ashfield,
Aye.
Plymouth Michael Thompson,
Aye.
West St. Paul Ross Beckwith,
Aye.
Minneapolis Engineering Jeni Hager,
Aye.
Minneapolis Planning Kathleen Mayell,
Aye.
St. Paul Engineering Nick Peterson,
Aye.
and St. Paul Planning Bill Dermody.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. That item carries, and that is everything on the executive committee. So I will turn it over to Scott Mareck and David Burns to go through the planning subcommittee items today. Scott?
Thank you, Madam Chair. TAC planning met in February and considered an amendment to the 2023 UPWP that is before you today. David will go over details of this amendment, but just a quick executive summary. There are red, highlighted, and underlined text in the document that is what TAC planning considered and approved without opposition, and those amendments total, I believe, around $316,000. The main amendment is a $200,000 amendment to the regional solicitation evaluation study for 2023 that will look at nationwide best practices for how performance measures can be used to inform regional solicitation investment. Subsequent to the TAC planning meeting, staff went over some administrative smaller amendments to the UPWP. Those are highlighted in yellow in your attachment, and David Burns will go over those as well. I believe the yellow changes would require a separate motion to the TAC planning recommendation. David?
Great. Thank you very much, Chair Mareck. Yeah, Joe, if you could pull up that PowerPoint, I'd appreciate it greatly. And as Scott was saying, we have actually two different things here. Since this has been approved by TAC planning, TAC planning earlier, well, in the month of February, there has been a couple of slight alterations, which just kind of illustrates well how much of a kind of a revolving document this UPWP can be at times. So nothing real substantive, but there are minor changes from the iteration that TAC planning recommended for approval and what was included in the packet here. Those changes are actually highlighted in yellow. But in terms of the amendment overall, so the 2023 UPWP was adopted in October of 2022, and really that whole process begins going through the TAC process with the TAC planning, et cetera, in like August of 2022. So really what happens at that time, project managers in particular must provide kind of an estimate of each project's budget at that time. And then we have to sort of like budget how much we're going to carry into 2023, subsequent years, et cetera, as well as plan for needs that may or may not develop over the course of the next few months and in the course of 2023. So obviously numerous factors may cause a delay in when a project starts or a change in scope is necessary, which is why we're bringing this UPWP amendment to you this early in the year, if that kind of makes sense. We are adding a total of $316,000 for 2023. All of that is going to come from local funds, i.e. MVEST, and not from our federal consolidated planning grant funds, just for clarification there. Joe, if you could please go to the next slide. So I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but you can see some of the major ones here. There were changes to consultant studies. They are all detailed in Appendix C of the UPWP. So as Scott Scott mentioned, we did add a significant sum to the regional solicitation evaluation study. And this is really to address how we can better tie performance measures into the regional solicitation so that we can more effectively ensure that the regional solicitation is making a impact on overall system performance. Another major change is the principal arterial intersection mobility study. That amendment will allow us to use the 2050 transportation model for the project and thus allow it to align with our 2050 transportation policy plan. So very necessary amendment there. There's also some new tasks within the urban freight distribution study, which focus on parcel delivery and how it may impact VMT, greenhouse gases, and then also strategies to help mitigate negative effects of that scenario. Next slide, please, Joe. So we did add 2 new studies that TAC planning saw, and then a third, not really a study, but an engagement tool, which came about sort of after TAC planning saw this original presentation and recommended it for approval. The first is the electric vehicle public engagement and city support study. So this is going to provide information and programs to help individuals and cities make decisions on, charging infrastructure, vehicle and vehicle investment. And so the budget to that, we're guessing right around that $150,000 mark. The end date to that will be the end of next year, Q4 2024. The other is a very important one, the regional stops model update. So this is going to update our transit forecasting stops modeling program to incorporate the 2022 onboard survey data. So obviously very necessary and useful information. The total budget of that is just $85,000, and we expect the end date to be Q3 of 2024. The other new one that is basically came to be based on feedback after TAC planning is the regional solicitation engagement tool. This is a new activity that will develop an online tool to collect public input during the 2024 regional solicitation, ultimately to assist the TAB and its subcommittees in developing funding scenarios and final project selection that better represents kind of what the public envisions for the region. Next slide, please. Okay, we have an updated 2023 UPWP budget. Basically, just a couple of slight changes in the tasks and how much the consulting cost is for each of those tasks. But overall, the salaries, of course, have stayed the same, as well as the overhead and expenses. Our federal CPG funds stay at about 5.1 million, and then that required local match is the same. The overmatch is, as I mentioned, $316,000, and we call it overmatch because that is actually just local funds and not any of that consolidated planning grant funds from FHWA, FTA, and distributed via MnDOT. So no changes to the federal funds. And Joe, if you want to go to the next slide. With that, I am more than happy to help answer any questions and any clarifications that you all might have.
Thank you, David and Scott. Are there any questions for David or Scott? I see Joe has his hands up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Joe McPherson here with Anoka County. Quick question on the presentation there, and then in the actual amended work program there. So the engagement tool, that online engagement tool that I know was first tried out here with the last solicitation, looking at what the amendment's proposing, it looks like the timeline is right smack dab where we'd be putting the project scores together, and then looking at what people's preferences are at that point. to me, it seems like it'd be better if that was done earlier in the process, maybe before the scores were released and all of that. So maybe just some commentary back on that.
Excellent commentary.
I'll jump in
Can't
here, Dave.
specifically address that. Yeah, Steve, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair and Joe for the good question. Yeah, timing, I think we could have improved last year when we did this for the first go around. And I think the intent here is before the scoring is done, or before the scoring perhaps even starts, this would be done. So you won't have a ranked list. And that was maybe one of the shortcomings last time, is people saw the lists and such when they're trying to think about these more conceptual topics of where do you want to put money. And so we're going to try and move that up earlier in the schedule to be more this fall. Scoring will be early 2024, the first few months of 2024. So the thought is before those rank lists are done, this survey will be closed.
Okay, thanks for that.
And then,
Thank you. And then Steve, you had your hand up next, I believe.
Yep. I'll just keep going, Madam Chair. And so I wanted to put a clean motion on the table here, and then we can further the discussion too if people have questions. But just because we did have the proposal that came from TAC planning plus there's administrative changes that are shown in yellow. So I'm going to put a motion on the table just so it's a clean motion. So I'll move the proposed amendments to the 2023 Unified Planning Work Program as shown in the attached document titled 2023 UPWP Attachment 1, including the yellow highlights.
Thank you for the clean motion. Is there a second?
Innocent Teo, with the MPC here, will second that.
Thank you, Innocent. And then any questions or comments or discussion from committee members? Adam Harrington had his hand up first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple comments. One, I appreciate the update to the staff's regional forecast. As most of you know, that's going to have an impact on $1 billion+ of transit projects as we think about ridership forecast and how that figures into future transitway development. So that'll be a great addition of new information on that one. And then the second to the last slide that shows the increase to the budget, it showed staff increases and consultant increases. And since we're approving this, my question is, for the salary cost, are there particular staff positions that are paid with this fund, or is it a chargeable account for the work? And then if it's a chargeable account, how does the actuals compare for 2022 to what we're forecasting here? Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair and Adam. Actually, there was no change to the staff salary cost. That is literally the exact same from the current UPWP budget and what we do. Yeah, it's just the consultant cost that changed.
So my question still stands though, as far as the salary cost, since it's half, are those funds that people draw from to do work on various projects, or other FTEs assigned that those costs cover?
Yeah, great question. What we do is we look at all of our FTEs and we distribute, have their rate, and we distribute it based on the number of weeks they put into each task, and just do a simple multiplication. Those are majority 80% funded by our consolidated planning grant federal dollars with that required 20% local match. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, and I guess my only other question would be, how does that compare to last year? Is there any sense for what was actually used versus what was budgeted?
So what we do when we're kind of reconciling this at the end of the year is that we always use our CPG fully to fund staff salaries. So staff salaries are always kind of at an 80-20. And then if there's excess CPG, or we did not spend as much CPG as budgeted on consulting costs, then we have like a lower percent of CPG allocated to consulting than we had in the budget.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Adam. Any further discussion from committee members on this item? Seeing none, the motion on the table is to approve the proposed amendments to the UPWP as shown in the attachment, including the yellow highlights. All in favor signify by saying aye by roll call. Joe?
Joe McPherson, Anoka County.
Aye. Aye.
Lyndon, sorry. Aaron Labrie, Dakota County.
Aye.
Chad Ellos, Hennepin County.
Aye.
Brian Isaacson, Ramsey County.
Aye.
Greg Jensen, Scott County.
Aye.
Lisa Leitner, Washington County.
Aye.
Elaine Kotsukos, Tab.
Aye.
Steve Peterson, MTS.
Aye.
Michael Larson, Community Development.
Aye.
Adam Harrington, Metro Transit.
Aye.
April Crockett, MnDOT Metro.
Aye.
Innocent AO, MPCA.
Aye.
Bridget Reef, MAC.
Aye.
Matt Fighton, Suburban Transit.
Aye.
Eddie Deed.
Aye.
Kyle Sabota, Bicycle Planner, or member.
Aye.
Lindsay Turner Bargain, Pedestrian Representative.
Aye.
Carl Keel, Metro Cities, Bloomington.
Aye.
Charlie Howley, Chanhassen.
Aye.
Palomi, Lakeville.
Aye.
Robert Ellis, Eden Prairie.
Aye.
Jim Kozlucher, Fridley.
Aye.
Ken Ashfield, Maple Grove.
Aye.
Michael Thompson, Plymouth.
Aye.
Ross Beckwith, West St. Paul.
Aye.
Jeni Hager, Minneapolis Engineering.
Aye.
Kathleen Mayel, Minneapolis Planning.
Aye.
Nick Peterson, St. Paul Engineering.
Aye.
And Bill Dermody, St. Paul Planning.
Aye.
Thank
you, everyone.
you. Thank you. That item carries and concludes the items from the planning subcommittee. So I will turn it over to Michael Thompson for the funding and programming committee report.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, the funding and programming met February 16th. We had no official business items. However, we did hear presentations from Jeff Freeman and Tony Fisher regarding the climate action work plan through MTS, and then the regional transportation and climate change multimodal measure study. We received an update from Tony Fisher. And then lastly, where the most focus was for this informational item was the potential changes for 2024 regional solicitation, and that is on our agenda today. And maybe I could just give a high level overview, but we did go through a handful of criteria, I think about 8 different criteria, talking about what are some adjustments that we could make, maybe not wholesale change the entire process, but make some adjustments to move this solicitation in the right direction for scoring, maybe tying closer the performance measures for safety. That was discussed on perhaps adding additional points for safety in the roadway categories. We didn't get in too much depth for that, but there was not much opposition against that. We did talk a little bit about it was a bicycle pedestrian heavy selection through the tab for this solicitation, and just talking about funding outside the ranges. And the discussion was, yeah, these are ranges and guidelines. Ultimately, tab has that discretion. But some of the members wanted to make sure that geographic balance and equity is very important as tab makes those decisions. Another item that came up from a couple members was agency priorities. So maybe when submittals occur, agencies put down what their priority projects are in a ranked order. just to give Tab an idea of what those are, and perhaps that could help with tiebreakers. I'm not going to go through all of these, but we did have a good discussion, and I'm sure we'll have a good discussion today. But staff does have a presentation on all of these different areas that also recaps the SMP discussion as well. So, Chair, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Are there any questions for Michael on the funding and programming report? Okay, seeing none, then I will turn it over to, I think it's Joe and Steve maybe, who are going to present on, I'm sorry, my agenda that I'm looking at is in a different order. Which one are we taking first, Joe? Which information item?
It's going to be Adam's item. Sorry about
Okay.
that. We had you must have had the one we shared with you last week before swapping it.
So now you all know that I prepare ahead of time, so I had an old agenda. All right, Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This presentation loaded up. Can y'all see it? Yay.
Yes,
Okay,
we see it.
well,
Yep, thank you.
this is a series of slides that I've used in various forms with our own audience at the Metropolitan Council and at the Transportation Committee, and I wanted to provide an update to this group because there have been a lot of changes over the past 3 years at Metro Transit, starting with March 2020 with the beginning of the pandemic, but really as we were trying to emerge from it in the summer of 2021, struggling with workforce shortage that also occurred at the same time. And really, ultimately, it isn't until this year that we're able to find some stability. So this first slide tells that story a little bit. For the last 3 years, we've been using August 2019 or December 2019 as kind of our base to say this is, quote, pre-pandemic as 100% of the service hours that we operate on the street, and we're comparing to that. The chart on the left shows the percentage of weekly service hours that are scheduled for the whole system. And so by June 2020, we had actually added some service back that wasn't part of our regularly scheduled quarterly picks. And so we are at about 74% system-wide of the service that we had previously delivered. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like, but a large part of that was commuter express service. You'll recall the governor had a stay-at-home order, and those who are not functioning in quote essential services to work remotely when you can. So that really changed the dynamic of the travel patterns we were seeing. And so our focus was to provide really a core network for people who didn't have that choice and to provide that mobility around the system. So we were able to incrementally improve service by September, December, and that really is made up of local frequency improvements, things like light rail that was at 20-minute frequency is back to every 15 minutes. Some of our local service that was really down to a lean schedules back to improve to 20 or every 15 minutes. And the chart on the right illustrates that pretty well. You can see the blue bars represent the number of hours that we schedule for any particular daily period, weekday period. And the yellow line is the scheduled operators, how many that we put out for operation on schedule, but then our workforce is in red. And one of the charts that I've used previously shows this red line that's been really in decline for the last 10 years. But now we have a little bit of a break because we've changed the structure of our service back in March and June of 2020. And by the time we get to 2021, August, we're really hoping that we're going to turn the corner here, that some of the restrictions are being lifted for COVID and things are starting to open up. And we really want to provide more service. And so we did schedule more service in August 2021, as you see here, but we didn't have enough operators to deliver that service. And you may have heard me and others in transit say, well, we scheduled it, but we scheduled the service 3 to 6 months before it's actually operating. And in this environment, 3 to 6 months is a long time, and a lot can change in the dynamic nature of the workforce as it is today. So we ended up reducing service, and we've been kind of in a service reduction mode ever since August 2021, all the way until now. And now I think we're hoping to turn the corner here, and I've got some slides that show where we're at on that. But this is really the big picture on where we've been. And as we sit here today, we're about 69, 70% of our service network compared to 2019. Get the slides to go. Okay, so a big part of this is hiring. We've been attempting to hire bus operators all the way since March 2021. And we've done a number of things to try to improve the attractiveness of service to come be a bus operator for Metro Transit. We had open houses, we could hire you on the spot, but it wasn't really until October last year where we were able to get a hiring wage improvement. And so there's a couple of things that happened here. We have our hiring pay increase, the hiring bonus increase, and hopefully to help retention, we have an increase to all ATU positions in the operations ranks. So we hopefully will have stemmed the retirement flow and those kinds of things. So we've got a lot of great information. There's just this last week, we had a hiring event at our new North Loop garage in Minneapolis where you could come and drive a bus through the garage. And again, you could be hired on the spot if you had your CDL. We provide the training. We had 150 people come, and we had about 120 people drive our bus around the garage, which was pretty fun. So over the course of this challenge, we've had these guiding principles. The first thing is maintain reliability of our scheduled service. That's one of the most important things our customers expect. If we say we're going to be there, we should be there. We know that if you are a customer and you expect the bus to be there and it's scheduled to run every half hour and then it doesn't show up and we didn't tell you about it, if we couldn't make the decision in time, we're not leaving a very good customer experience in an environment where a lot of people do still have options, then we're going to lose that opportunity. So we want to make sure that the service that we schedule is delivered. And that's the challenge we have with our workforce. So we've made a number of reductions, and part of doing that is identifying where customers have an alternative. Maybe there's more frequency on that particular corridor and there's capacity on the buses we deploy. Maybe it's a park and ride corridor and there's a park and ride downstream closer to the downtown that people can get to. Maybe it's an adjacent route a couple blocks away, because we want to minimize the impact to our riders. And so what that means is as we reduce service, those trips and routes that are carrying fewer people are more likely to see reductions than those that are carrying more people. And at the same time, we have to balance the network frequency and coverage across the system. The illustration on the right really shows where the lion's share of our service suspensions have been, which is different than just reductions. You can see the little red bus icons. Those are commuter express routes that have been suspended since March 2020, and a number of urban locals as well, and one suburban local that shows on here. So it's a pretty big impact on the numbers, but we're also managing to the ridership that we actually see. This chart goes back to 2014. The green line represents daily rides on local bus routes. The purple is LRT, the red is commuter express, the yellow is supporting local, and orange is suburban local, and then BRT is in the brown at the bottom. So you can see that there was a trend of decline leading up to 2020, and a gentle slope perhaps. And one of those areas is that red line commuter express, where we were carrying about 30 to 40,000 rides a day. Now we're carrying 3,000 to 4,000 rides a day. And part of that is supply and demand. We're not providing the service, but we also know that as we talk to our employer partners in downtowns, that they're not seeing a lot of pressure from their employees to come into the office 5 days a week as well. So that's a big change. But we are able to look at ridership, and that helps us determine where we can adjust service to balance that capacity versus volume of seats on a bus or trips on a route. And so this is a key component to that. But as you will hear, if you haven't already, we are continuing to grow incrementally from where we were last year and the year before that. So that's a good sign. And then lastly, I'll just note that this line on the bottom, this brown, that's BRT, is going up. And we've got orange line that we brought online in December 2021 and D line in December 2022. And as we continue to improve and add these corridors, the switch between the green line and that brown line will occur, and they'll start to come much closer together as BRT is a larger share of our system and our riders. Just a quick snapshot on the proportion of the types of service in terms of the trips that are scheduled on any weekday. Again, the most noticeable element here is the pink. That's the Commuter Express, which is much smaller than it was in fall 2019. That's probably the biggest delta. The other thing that you'll see here is it's a little bit difficult, but there's the orange. That's literally the orange line grew there, and we also added some local service in fall of 2022. So a little bit of a snapshot of the whole system. This is what our system looked like back in August 2019. The purple are the contracted routes, the green are the Commuter Express routes, and the blue are the local routes. So remember that diagram that showed how many Commuter Express routes were suspended. So in the next couple maps, you'll see those green routes go away. This is the weekday route and segment suspension as of August, and this really hasn't changed. So this is all the Commuter Express routes, a number of local, suburban local routes. This is just showing the balance of where we've suspended service across the system. And then when you think about the number of trips on whether it's a suspended route or an existing route, we've reduced service on a lot of our network across the system, and it's really been fairly proportional to the amount of service and the ridership that's been observed. But we still have a really strong network, and this has really been our focus for the last, well, ever since I've been here, and certainly in the last 3 years, is that core local network. How do we continue to strengthen it and make sure that our transit service meets the needs of communities that are most beneficial from it, people who use it not just for work trips, but for grocery trips or going to the clinic or school or any number of other destinations. So the multi-trip purpose type customer. So we have a good network here. We want to build on that moving forward. This is these are the changes that happened last fall, October and December. So you can see the reductions here that were either we moved some routes to contracted operator because Metro Transit didn't have the operators, and I'll just say that market impact goes both ways. Our contracted operators are also having challenges hiring people, so that's a factor too, but we're trying to balance our workforce here. D-Line, which opened in December, and that's been doing really well. I didn't add the ridership slide in here, but this is one where we've seen ridership grow significantly. In fact, ridership on a daily basis on D-Line is back to where Route 5 was almost in 2019. So it's doing really well compared to the rest of the system, and we're really excited about that. And we'll continue to make adjustments to the schedule as we learn how this service is going to be operating. It's our longest arterial BRT line, and so we did adjust the schedule accordingly. And because it's so long, we're going to need to make some additional schedule tweaks in the coming months. But I'll just note that the Route 5, which this largely replaced, is operating every 60 minutes, and all the other BRTs, we've removed the underline service. We really wanted to start this corridor with some underlying service so that as people who aren't really ready to make that walk to the station or able to make that walk to the station have an option in this corridor. A lot of schedule change info. I left the slide in here. Obviously, the schedule changes are in and done, and our customers are aware, but this is something that we promote each time we make schedule changes. And our next round of schedule changes are coming up on March 18th. So just a couple weeks away. So here's some changes for March 18th. We're not making reductions, and this is a big deal because for the last year, each one of these schedule changes has been a reduction. While at the same time, we're opening our new North Loop garage, which is also really exciting. And that's a big transition for us as well. So as we look at our North Loop garage, this is a picture of it at night. It's all ready to go. We've got our parts being stocked. We've got operators being trained. We're going to be ready to roll on March 18th. As I mentioned earlier, we used it for a hiring event, and we're able to use our buses driving around the garage and the inside to let people give it a try. So we're in a good position here on this new garage. And this next slide will show you where it is. And it's right next to where I'm sitting now at the Haywood garage near Target Field. And so you see these two pluses, that's Fred T. Haywood garage and the North Loop garage together. And at the same time, we're closing Martin J. Reuter garage from Brooklyn Center. So where our garages are located is really geographically determined for efficiency and the balance of service. And as we've seen service operate between MJR and FTH, we're still providing a good level of efficiency because there's a lion's share of those routes do come downtown, and that opportunity to use this garage is still really good. So 2023 construction projects. We coordinate with our city and county partners a lot of things that impact our real operations every day. And every year there's new construction projects, whether it's street redevelopment or street repair, bridges, a lot of things that need to be done on the city, county, MnDOT side. And I'm sharing a couple things here because it's really important to make sure we're coordinated on what really happens. So a couple big projects that we were anticipating were going to be happening by April. The Minnesota and Kellogg detours are actually going to be happening this summer. And so there's a reconstruction project here. I included the link in the presentation to the St. Paul website that shows how that's going to lay out and what the street images could be as they move forward to constructing that. These are the routes listed here in that second bullet that will be affected. And so there are a lot of different detours. This is a big impact to our service and to traffic, of course. So there takes careful coordination. And so we've had a little bit of back and forth in our own scheduling efforts and communication because this is going to start in summer, not before June, it looks like, as we coordinate with the city of St. Paul. But we're going to be ready to go, and I think the city is going to have a nice project when it's all done. Another big one is Osseo Road. This is a Hennepin County project, and this is a major project also where Hennepin County is actually closing Osseo Road. This is a major link between North Minneapolis and Brooklyn Center, the link between them. There's only a few access points. And so in order to do this work, that includes redecking of the bridge and safety upgrades and the complete streets elements, as well as one of our BRT stations for C and D line. We're going to be on detour when this work starts. Again, will be summer this year for at least a year. And we're going to have a long detour that'll take 3 to 5 minutes, depending on direction and time of day. That'll go across 45th up Washburn to Highway 100 and then back to Brooklyn Boulevard. So this impacts several communities. It impacts our operation and our customers, and careful coordination is the watchword here. So we're looking forward to that schedule adjustment and for the work to be done in 2024 so we can get back to a regular service. So a lot of topics about what we've been reducing, some of the challenges that we've had. But now that we're turning the corner in reality, and I think we are seeing this in a workforce way that we've observed some stability over the last couple of months and some positive hiring trends. We're now setting the course for the next 5 years for how do we grow our system? Where do we add service? What are the places that we want to make those improvements? And then how do we integrate our service with the new transitways that are coming online? So we've got a lot of work that we're starting up right now. Over the next year, we're going to conduct a survey, and I'll end on that slide. There's some information. We've just released the survey, and you can take it too. We want to be able to tell the story a little bit, what I did today on where have we been in the past couple of years and how do we make our decisions, maybe in a little bit more detail than I shared, for our customers and communities, and then identify how we want to improve that service out to 2027. So the key here is we're not looking to the 2040 TPP or the 2050. This is really the next 5 years because there's a lot going on, and we really want to focus on how we can deliver that service reliably. What is included are the changes to existing routes and service, frequency and span of that, and how we fit that together with metro lines. Discontinued service and facility closures. So there's a number of park and rides that are closed or suspended service to them, and so we need to make decisions there. We might have newer redesigned routes as part of this project, and there might be a number of speed and reliability initiatives that go along with it. What's not included are changes to the construction or the alignment of planned metro lines, any major capital projects, no fare policy changes, any projects outside of the metro service area, though it doesn't mean we wouldn't want to coordinate with our suburban provider colleagues. We certainly would. And it does not include any long-term or regional planning. So thinking about the TPP that's happening right now, a lot of updates to that. So this isn't necessarily going to be driving our whole TPP initiative, but we'll certainly learn a lot, and we can apply what we've learned to our inputs to the TPP. A little bit of a timeline. We're just starting our engagement in values and principles, which I'm going to talk about next. We want to confirm that network of today, meaning what we're operating on the street today, plus or minus some additional service. We need to establish that. And so part of what that means is changes or long-term decisions about some of the routes we have suspended or facilities that are with those. And then we want to propose how we would grow service. And that happens in the winter, and then we'll have a recommended plan next spring, and there'll be some iterative process and input from our communities before we look for council approval of that. And lastly is our transit value survey. So what's important for us is that we're able to really affirm and right set the track that we're on. We have this transit value survey, and that this is available to all of you now. We have an agency survey and a customer survey. And so you can use this link or this QR code that's on the screen and take the survey now or later. And it would be really helpful to have that input from each of our partner agencies, but also know we're happy to reach out to you and schedule time to have conversations about where those values are and are the particular projects of interest, which of course there are, as this not only includes our local and express service and LRT lines, but it includes B line, E line, Gold line, and Green line extension. So that's a lot of information. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to it all. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Adam. Are there any questions from committee members? I see Matt Fighton has his name up, or his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Adam, just want to thank you for the information. I think this was a great overview of really the state of transit in the region, and the STA providers can certainly echo a lot of what Adam shared. The STA providers are certainly, we provide primarily commuter services and on-demand services as well, and I've seen similar patterns related to our express service. We're at about 60% of service compared to pre-pandemic levels on the express side. Ridership still being down about 60% on that front. We have seen significant growth in our on-demand microtransit services, which is a little different in terms of the service types than Metro Transit may operate. But I guess, Adam, when I get done talking here, if there's any update, I know there's a pilot being done related to microtransit. If I don't know if you're able to speak to that, but again, I just want to thank you for the great summary of where things are at in transit, and we agree that things are trending the right way. And also just want to say thank you for mentioning that STA providers will be part of Metro Transit's planning process as part of the TPP. Metro Transit's always been a great partner from a regional transit perspective in that regard. So just thank you for that, and I'll leave it there.
Madam Chair, Matt, yes, indeed, we are looking at and operating a Metro Transit micro pilot project in North Minneapolis now. And I would encourage people to go to the last Monday's Met Council Transportation Committee. We provided an overview on that, and it's a really good learning experience for us to understand how it would work in that market. And it's going to be one of the tools of consideration, much like Matt has talked about the microtransit in Southwest area, Southwest Prime and META as well. Are there opportunities for us to look at that model in other contexts other than the urban area? So yes, yes, and yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt and Adam. Next is Brian.
Yeah, Adam, thanks for the presentation. I guess when I look at the details of the presentation, it appears that the operating paradigm is that we're looking at the system as it is today, and it's more of a refine and restore what was. Is there any thought about any sort of systemic changes, or, you know, like you've referenced that don't expect any long-term planning here, but I guess the question that our folks are asking me is there a systemic change in play here as people look at the transit system and how it supports the region? And I'm not clear where that's going to pop up.
Madam Chair, Brian, well, I'll just say systemic could mean a lot of different things these days, but I think that short term, we're going to be looking at the system and how we grow, and it does include those transit ways. It's not necessarily intended to guide our system transitway plan moving forward, but it certainly will set our base. And our base is pretty important for the system and how we want to grow forward. You may recall where we had the service improvement plan that was a system-wide plan, long-term, and that was a larger scope than this is. And while we're not looking beyond really 2027, that this is still going to influence everything beyond that. It's still going to provide the influence and the context for where we continue to grow from there. I don't know if that answers your question or muddles it.
Adam, you broke up for me quite a bit. I don't know if that was just me or if that was you. Brian, did you get what you needed?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks.
Okay. All right, next is Bridget.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Adam, I just wanted to thank you for the presentation and let you know I may be reaching out. I'm going to suggest to some folks here internally that we invite you to give the same presentation to our commissioners. I think they'd be interested. And I will let you know. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bridget and Innocent.
Yes, Madam Chair, Adam, in your presentation, you showed some of the efforts you're doing to recruit more operators, and including probably reducing requirement and also increasing in fare. As you, from your record, do you have more people signing up now, more operators, or as things change? Because I know some of the routes were probably removed from the plan because they didn't have a lot of operators. So as the situation change, are you getting more people signing up to drive or not?
Madam Chair, Innocent, yep. Thank you for that question. We are indeed seeing a lot more interest. And last fall, after we had our wage increase, we had a couple of different events where we had 200 people attend that showed interest in becoming a bus operator, which we had not seen since January 2020, where we also had a really big hiring event. So now we're in a really good footing to show us some stability, but those people who express interest really need to get through the CDL training process and be operating before we're confident we're going to see larger numbers. So it's probably going to be more of an incremental service add, and we have been adding trips here and there in the last month, and we'll be adding more trips in June, and we're looking forward to continuing to grow. So yes, we're seeing more people show interest in this area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Innocent and Adam and Lissa.
Couple of questions. One, I put one in the chat. Adam, did you say that there is a separate survey for agency partners versus the public? Did I hear that right?
You did hear that right. Let me, you know what I'll do? I'll paste it in the chat.
Okay. And if there is, and I guess this goes for both, what are your plans? And I know you've got a full engagement team working on this. What is the plans for the rollout to get both the agency link and the public link out? One, partially asking because we can amplify, share, etc. on our social media channels. And so I want to make sure that I am sharing a post as opposed to just sharing the link. But two, want to make sure that people are actually getting the agency one kind of emailed to them. Yeah, Adam, this is what I have, but it just goes to one link survey. Like this is the one that's out there, but is there a separate, like this, what you just sent in the chat just sends the link to the Network Now page. And I'm not, unless I'm missing it, I'm not seeing two separate links for customers versus agency people.
So Lisa, if you click on the really long link that I sent there, and I just clicked on it, it should take you to a survey page that says, you know, share what it looks like.
Oh, I see. Up on the top, it does say government agency. Okay, I see that.
Yeah.
Can that be emailed directly to this group? So people have it in their inbox so they can share it. Also thinking the TPP work group, the transit work group, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yep. And so literally this group is the first one to see this at all. We just literally got it done yesterday. So timing is right on. Yep. Happy to email that out to this group and to share. And we'll be bracing for the request, the list of requests to come in and meet with any group who's interested in learning more about what we're up to and to take that survey. First step is really to get some grounding on people's opinions through that survey. And that's really going to help inform our next steps and how we frame up our work and the conversations. But that'll be the lion's share of what we're doing between now and the end of April, early May.
Great. Thank you for that, Adam. Any other questions from committee members? All right, seeing none. Adam, if you want Joe to send that email out, you can send those links and whatnot to Joe, or you can send it directly if you want as well. But look forward to seeing where this goes. So thank you for the update.
Thank you.
All right, and then our last information item for today, I think, is Joe and maybe Steve presenting on potential changes to the 2024 regional solicitation. Joe?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I'll maybe kick this off, and thanks to Michael Thompson too for the introduction on some of the discussion that we had at Funny Programming. So if you look on the agenda, there's two links. just want to make sure people see both of those. One is this PowerPoint presentation. Number two is the criteria and weighting, several pages, but that's really important for the first topic area. And so just to lay out what you'll see the next few months, we've got 2 months of info items on the 2024 regional solicitation cycle. So March and April. Then at the May TAC meeting, you will see an action item, which is the completed redlined application in its entirety. Will come before you for a recommendation. So really have 3 months, heavy lifting over the next 2 months here on any potential changes. Again, what we heard in the surveys, most of that was at least the bigger topics we're proposing to tackle as part of the the regional solicitation evaluation going into 2026. But we did pull out a number of them, and we can add more to if people want to do some that we think are kind of more bite-sized changes leading into this upcoming 2024 cycle. What we heard at TAB was certainly an interest in probably changing the scoring around. Safety is the one topic area we heard. Maybe there would be others too, but I think TAB is going to want to see that same chart, that criteria and measures weighting and weigh in at the policy level. But again, that's the first topic at hand here today. So Joe's going to go through the PowerPoint. We're going to pause after each topic area and give people a chance to provide feedback. Again, in some of these items, the staff recommendation is more just trying to put something on the table to generate discussion and know it's going to veer this way and that way. But it's always nice to react to something versus try and come up with something on the fly. So Joe, why don't you take us through this? Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Steve. As Steve mentioned, yeah, we started off with a recommendation. That's a recommendation, based sort of on our approach to starting the topic. And there's already to this one been tweaks. So the first one is we heard a lot on we usually hear some, but we heard a lot on the surveys and a lot of feedback about increasing the weighting of safety and our emissions categories. So with the low-hanging fruit, I'll start with emissions, actually, that second piece down, where we're recommending no change because we're sort of waiting for the regional transportation and climate change multimodal measures process to conclude and then incorporate what we learned from that into the 2026 cycle, which would probably lead to changes in how some of these measures are scored, along with then what we would consider for scoring amounts. For safety, which was a slightly bigger, we heard a slightly bigger response to that. We had recommended going into the last meeting a 100 point, and point one there, a 100 point increase for safety issues in the project area. And that was changed after the last meeting to be 50 points for the crash reduction, which is that cost benefit analysis that many of you have probably filled out. And then point two, for the spot mobility and safety, strategic capacity, and reconstruction modernization, we had talked about 50 points each for that and the pedestrian safety measure. We had a comment that said they wanted that where a member wanted to see a higher percentage for the crash reduction because they didn't believe that the pedestrian safety measure was related directly to the project. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it is directly related to the project. But anyway, based on that feedback, we've changed that to 70 and 30. As we point out below, the result would be having 4 1,200 point totals and a number of only 1,100 point totals. We don't see that as a problem, but that would be a little bit contrary to what we've seen in the past. And to answer a question that came up in TAC Exec, the reason that you only see this in highways is not because we're trying to treat highways differently or promote highway safety over other safety. It's because most of the other safety in the non-motorized is very qualitative, and we didn't really and we kind of felt like we want to take a look at those measures going into 26, but that's certainly a topic that can be on the table. So with that, I'd send for questions on this first one. This is probably the longest discussion we'll have under the 10 or so slides.
Okay.
Sorry, I was gonna say maybe as people are discussing this, maybe we can bring up that attachment 1 so people can kind of see where safety is kind of shown in the points there. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Joe and Steve, and committee members. I see Mackenzie has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Steve and Joe, on item number 2, you referenced that there was a comment from somebody that then led to a change in that going from, I think what was proposed as 50-50 to being 70-30. Can you speak to that a little bit more? Like, why was it changed due to one comment, and what was the one comment? And I think my concern from the pedestrian perspective is that we've conducted the pedestrian safety action study. We have that information. We know that the crashes and the risk to people walking and biking continues to increase year over year, most recently. And I have a concern that we would have changed that from 50-50 to 70-30, depending on what that comment was. And also just some specific questions about the 70% piece versus the 30% piece, and crash reduction, understanding that, yes, with the roadway modernization, we want to make sure that we are increasing safety and reducing crashes for all users. And particularly in that context, where we have, presumably highway speeds oftentimes, and if there are then pedestrian concerns as the vulnerable roadway users, I don't know that it's advisable to reduce that consideration for pedestrians as vulnerable users in that context in particular. And so I'm just curious about that, because on the 70% side of things, is that looking at all crashes reduced? So not just K&A, and is the pedestrian side looking at just fatal and serious injuries? Because that would just lend additional concern as far as, if it's inclusive of all crashes and reducing all crashes, some of which might be property damage, which are certainly still important, but just consideration for that as well between property and actually protecting life and limb and the users themselves. So would be happy to hear what you have for that.
Well, Chair and Mackenzie, the low-hanging fruit there is that the reason that it was changed, I mean, we're talking about a 20-point swing, so I don't want to belittle that, but 20 points in the grand scheme of this is not a lot. The reason for the change is because we started out with the 50-50 split in terms of adding 50 to, each of what is essentially where the heck am I? This crash reduction row and the pedestrian reduction row. Our as staff, that's a starting point. We had one member suggest shifting that, and nobody really combated that. So we didn't really feel putting staff's initial response above what members say makes a lot of sense. Now, as to the comment, there was maybe a little bit of editorial in there. I think the comment said that it's a measure based in large part on where you're located, and I think that's because you do have a better opportunity to score if you have more pedestrians around on that measure. As for your questions about the crashes reduced, that's a Steve, you might know more about this. You do know more about this than I do. Yeah. But that's a scoring process that favors heavily significant crashes and injuries. So, Steve, maybe you can say more about that than that, but it favors big crashes, if you will.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. The crashes reduced is the same benefit cost ratio that's used in HSIP. So that's a MnDOT measure. We just talked about the benefit of those crashes reduced, and that's the measure. So it's half of the BC ratio, I guess you'll put it, but it does, as Joe said, certainly favor those reducing those more serious crashes on our system. And that includes bike bed crashes too.
I think Steve and Joe, this might be a good time before we go to the next questions. There's a couple more hands up to maybe just really quick talk about process here, because I think Mackenzie's raising some good questions and they're technical related, but they're also process related, right? So one member makes one comment and we make a change. Can you talk a little bit about the process of, we'll have the conversation here today and then what happens?
Are Steve and I looking at each other?
Steve, go.
Okay. Yeah, so if there, we purposely on this one, we did want to generate more discussion relative to F&P. And that sounds like we're heading that direction. So, if there's consensus from the group, we'll bring that to tab in 2 weeks' time. And if there's kind of a couple different ideas floated, we'll document that too. And F&P is just around the corner too to dig into some of these in more detail. So, this will ebb and flow based on the feedback we receive at all the committees.
So I think what I heard at TAC exec this morning was F&P would have up to 2 more bites at this apple before a final recommendation needs to be made to TAB in order to stay on schedule to get the solicitation released and out to everyone on the timeline that we've previously talked about. So, so that's kind of, I have some questions here too. We're going to go through everyone else's hands and comments that are raised right now. And then I can share some of my thoughts, but I think that there'll be more conversation on this one for sure. So I'm going to go to Jim next, has his hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things. I think I understand that that we're increasing on roadway side, we're increasing points by 100 and applying those for safety purposes. And I guess I would encourage, based kind of on some of the information or summary that Mackenzie gave, that we consider that for other multimodal project proposals, that we maybe apply that, and maybe well in advance of having really the best information, as Joe states, for 2026. But we do know that those kind of crashes are increasing, and are some of the most severe crashes that we see in our metro. And so I think applying our best judgment in some way with emphasizing that safety would be something that would support the general comments that I received on the feedback that's garnered, and I think also begin maybe to address or to emphasize those projects that provide some additional safety features.
Thank you. Innocent.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, mine is not a question. I just kind of bring up on the mission possibility of maybe making some changes to the measures. It's great that they mention about the studies, climate change, and multi-modal measures process that we're working on now. And then maybe by that time, it will provide us with good methodology that we can apply for some of these regional solicitation projects. And also, we should also know that that EPA is revising some of the standards, especially for fine particulates, which might bring the standard quite close to what we have now on our monitoring network. And so it's something that we need to watch and make sure that we never exceed the standard. So I think that this will be important based on these studies that we're doing, that we have good documentations and information that we can use to apply, especially for roadways measures. Yeah, that's what I have.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the comment.
So Chair, to that point, our rationale, I think we point to our rationale for why we didn't suggest changing the emissions, but again, this was a staff starting point, so people can talk about other things as well.
So, we're very aware that the next solicitation is going to come very fast, and Met Council staff have put forward a schedule that we can get the package out and we can make a few tweaks and changes to it, but they're going to be very minor in nature as we set ourselves up for a bigger evaluation and look at the solicitation for 2026. We do know that TAB has had some conversations and have seen the trend lines and the performance measures for safety, and They've expressed concern over that and a desire to do something a little more to try and get us more on track in reaching some of those safety performance measures. So I guess questions I have raised on this suggestion here that's been put forward is why we're only focusing on roadway projects. If you take a look at all of the applications, safety shows up in all of the applications in one area or another. So I'd like to have, hopefully funding and programming dig into this a little bit more and take a look at other options that we might be able to raise safety up in the evaluation and scoring of our project applications for 2024, knowing that we're walking a fine line in trying to make a few changes and address, trying to get some more action on safety, but in a limited time frame. So those are some thoughts that I had, and offer it up to see if anyone else has any additional comments they'd like to make on this one.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I guess I would support the idea of pursuing additional points for safety. And I think just in general, what I'm been hearing at TAC and TAB is that we need to be thinking more about regional outcomes. We all want to get our projects funded. Ramsey County's included in that, but I think we oftentimes forget about the reason that we're funding all these projects is because as a region, we want to achieve certain outcomes that are important to the region. And one of those is safety. We already have a safety measure that we're required to track by federal law. We haven't met the targets for those for many years. So there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect in how we're investing as a region and meeting those safety targets. So I would just encourage us, I guess, whatever the details are to get from here to there, I would support doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Anyone else on this item today?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Steve. Yep. Oh, sorry. Michael, was that you?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Michael.
I guess, if FMP is going to dig into this a little more, it'd be nice to get some more direction from the full TAC here today on, if we are going to weight safety higher across these different categories, which other areas do we sacrifice? Is it cost effectiveness, risk assessment, equity and housing performance, congestion and air quality? So I think it's how are we going to offset boosting safety? What gets pushed back a little bit? So I think I think that'll be a tough discussion, but instead of just adding points, I think it's more of shifting priorities in these categories here. So it might be good to get some sense of where people are at on that.
Sure.
And
I think it's a good question, and some thoughts that we tossed around this morning in TAC Exec just to get people's kind of brains wrapped around this and thinking. I agree with Michael that trying to take points from any one particular area in order to boost the points in safety will be a challenging conversation that likely will not be successfully completed within the time frame that we have. But one idea is that we could reduce all of the other areas by the same relative amount. Therefore, you don't lose any of those metrics and you don't change their relative importance against each other than with respect to safety. So you would raise safety up and decrease everything else proportionally to retain the same kind of comparison between metrics. And that would give us an idea in the scoring of which projects are really going after safety improvements across the modes, because I do think that in order to really reach our safety performance targets, we need to use all the tools in our toolbox, and that's not limited to just a roadway project. So that's just one idea, and open the floor to other people's thoughts on that. Go ahead, Joe.
Chair, I'd like to just say that our starting point of just raising it up from 100 points and not taking away from anything else was sort of the simplicity, and we kind of felt like that provides a similar result to what you just mentioned. It sort of equally takes small pieces from elsewhere. The other approaches are certainly worth considering, but that was our approach. And again, it was a starting point. I just thought I'd put that background out.
Comment, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so, yeah, that's, maybe it was a couple options staff can think through, whether kind of proportionate, we had put 100 points on the table. The thing that jumps out to me, 100 points across the board is cost effectiveness, just, if you want to take away one thing, people can debate that, but that's one that's 100 points on every category. But my question actually was a little different though. It was, in this chart here, we've got safety as an actual criterion used in roadways and bike ped. It's not in transit, but it does show up within other measures. And I'm guessing that's what you're talking about, Madam Chair, that while maybe not kind of prescriptive on this row here as safety, we are awarding points maybe indirectly for safety elements within the transit categories, but it's not showing on the chart. Am I following you?
Yep. I went through all the applications yesterday. I did a search for safety. I found it, Steve.
That word search is just so convenient, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like for instance, in transit expansion, safety is part of multimodal elements and existing connections. It's also mentioned in the equity measure. So that's, you just have to kind of take the next step here to think about it in that context. So you've done it, sounds like.
I've done it.
Maybe I can jump back in, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Michael.
I mean, if we're truly trying to address safety, I think 100 points shift away from everything else. I think you need to make some wholesale changes if you're going to actually get projects that shift more towards safety. So I think what we're talking about here, may change things a little bit and move us in the right direction. Which I think is good. I guess is that kind of, this is just the first step in making adjustments for this solicitation, and maybe it's not the big fix that we're talking about, but we're just looking to take a step in the right direction just so F&P has some guidance. Would that be fair?
Yes, I believe that it's kind of a two-step process here, what we can do in the short term and then the 2026 big rework of this package. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, is there any other committee members who want to chime in on this one? Otherwise, we will go to the next slide in the presentation. I'm seeing no hands up, so go ahead, Joe.
And I'm guessing that's the longest slide we're going to have. There were some comments made about how in 2022, the TAB funded the bicycle pedestrian mode above its funding range, which is a bit of an unusual piece. And I think it wasn't necessarily well understood, or maybe not even well stated by some of us, that that wasn't really against policy. It was sort of against guidelines. So you can see the language we have there saying that if there's a rationale that TAB can adjust beyond that funding level. So our recommendation was not to make a change, and to also point out that when we create our first run at funding scenarios, we never go outside of the ranges. So those sort of evolve throughout the process. But we would not suggest a change because a lot of things are moving quickly in terms of funding amounts and sources amounts and stuff like that. So we want to keep the flexibility that's in there. Members at funding programming didn't necessarily disagree with that. They might have wanted to see a little bit more of a reminder of that throughout the process, that could happen. So that's maybe would have reduced how blindsided some people felt by it. That's all I have for that one.
Any questions or comments from committee members on this one? Go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Just a comment for those funding ranges and setting the limits. I think one thing I wanted to bring up was the use of over programming in the next solicitation. and some discussion around that, because I believe in some of the past solicitations that over programming was kind of up to TAB to assign to try to meet some of their goals, and then this one it was kind of programmed in to try to do the same thing, but it may have tied TAB's hands a little bit in trying to meet their expectations and goals, kind of those last projects in. So maybe just some consideration for staff of how the use of over programming and that amount and the process for that in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Chad. Good comment. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, maybe just that it's a good point, Chad, and maybe just a quick response on that. And I think you're right. Previously, we kind of held over programming till the end, and then we got some people were dissatisfied with that because then the modal ranges in totality shifted based on those last couple projects in. So last time we put it all in one pot, including the over programming, and I think it would. My gut would be to go back to what we used to do and save the over programming. Should have listened to Elaine a long time ago here, and I think that would be probably a better approach for 2024 is to hold that over programming money as a set aside. People can know it's coming and kind of what the general amount may be, but not put it in right at the beginning.
Okay.
My comment was based on the fact that TAB, it's an easier for them to add money and select more projects than take them away.
Agree.
Or it's a better feeling afterwards anyway.
All right, I'll go to the next one. Consideration of agency priorities. We've had some county feedback that included interest in somehow factoring in their high priority projects from individual sponsors versus lower priority projects. And so staff thought that this would be something to consider longer term for the evaluation. There's a handful of implementation logistical considerations. Funding and programming sort of thought that there's two concerns to have. One is that in a county area, for example, there's cities, counties, and transit providers all providing projects. So competing priorities could be problematic. And another comment was that, does that take away from sort of the regional focus of the solicitation? Though there's still some sentiment, I think that it could be somehow used as a end of process tiebreaker, if you will. But I think there was some concern with really embedding that into the process at this point. That's all I have there.
Thanks, Joe. Any questions or comments from committee members on this one? This definitely did come into play in this last solicitation. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, just a question. Does this get us in any trouble with the federal requirements or how we score projects, how we have a competitive system for analyzing projects?
I don't think so, but I'd let Steve and Elaine if they know something more than I do.
Yeah, good.
I guess,
go ahead, Elaine.
I was gonna say, clarifying, do you mean by having priorities identified? Is that what you mean? Is that?
Right, that as self-stated priorities as opposed to scored priorities.
Yeah, and I think it wasn't, they would still have to be scored. And so it might be if you have a project in roadways, a strategic capacity and one in modernization, and they were both the next ones to be picked and only one could be picked. This is where we would ask them what their priority is. Again, that would be only if it was the same agency's projects or the two being decided upon.
And I do think, to be fair, that's probably a small version of what the counties were meaning. I don't think they necessarily wanted it only to be in that situation, but
right. But I think that's question we could do it. Yeah.
Well, it's the only way we could probably do it to be totally regional and not to consider who the applicant is. But to Bill's question, I think we're actually about the most quantitative scoring process in the country. Well, I mean, I can't say in the entire country with authority, but we are amongst them. And something like this probably would not put up the antenna of our federal partners. That's my guess.
And I think we'd also have to be we also have to be careful that the ones selecting the projects to be funded are not the ones only on the committee, so that their priorities become the ones that are selected versus an applicant who's not sitting on the committee.
So maybe a process clarification for everyone too, Elaine, and Joe. I think it's true to say that an applicant can also withdraw an application that they've submitted at any point during the process up until awards have been issued, correct?
Correct. And I think TAB was a little concerned about how the decisions this last time became looking at specific projects, where typically they like to fund on their priority. So is it modernizing projects? Is it expanding? Is it transit? Is trying to keep it on a higher level? And this time it became looking at this project versus that project, and that became a big issue, because then it was very my project's getting picked over a different one, or now it's getting traded, and I think that caused a lot of concern this round. And I think TAB will be focusing next round on seeing, let's make our decisions on types of projects we want to be funded before we even see the list.
To Jenny's
And
question,
potentially in the future, we're setting that goal around the performance measures and making those investment decisions based on those big picture goals versus a list of projects, right? So
Right.
I don't know who tried to chime in there. Oh, go ahead, Elaine.
I think part of it too is I could think TAB would like to start having discussions on the funding scenarios before the scoring is even done. So that would start driving what types of scenarios to bring forward to them also.
That's good.
so I was just, that was me trying to get in. To your question, Jenny, I would add that you could certainly, anybody can withdraw a project. That has happened if they're for various reasons. Obviously, though, if you withdraw your project, that doesn't mean another one of yours is getting picked. That just means the one right below it, or maybe something in another category is getting picked, regardless of who the agency is. But if you're in a very specific situation where it's going to be you or that, one of your two projects, I suppose you could do that. So this time, this is the second consecutive, well, not really. This is the second consecutive year we went further down a list because of either a tied project or a very closely scored project. So the low-hanging fruit is ties. This time around, you might remember we had a tied project. We had two tied projects. We were actually going to fund one and not the other, and the applicant had expressed comfort with that, the applicant of the non-funded project. But we got all the way to TAB the second time around, and TAB said, no, you can't, if you can't do that with tied projects. And I think that's something that we might consider as maybe ways around, ways to use tied projects to find other priorities, whether it be geographic balance or something else like that. I think staff likes to remind us at times that out of 1,100 points, scores aren't really that precise. If each project scores 719 points, that doesn't necessarily mean they're the same. There's a lot of imprecision that goes into tied scores or to scores in general. And I think within a certain small range of points, they're essentially coin flips. So staff would actually recommend the the flexibility to fund one of two tied projects if it helps with another objective, such as modal distribution or geographic distribution. Funding and programming suggested considering ways for ties to be avoided. That's really tricky because we have all that many different measures playing out independently of each other. But if there's a way to do that, we could look into it. And then they suggested maybe there could be tiebreakers like the highest safety score or something like that, or agency priorities. That actually came across as somebody commented, sort of connecting the previous slide to this one. But I think going ahead, I'm actually hoping to have scores be a little more of a guide and a little less precise, but I'm kind of alone in that at times. But I think it's something that we can consider if there's reasons to fund one tied project and not another one.
Okay, go ahead, Joe. McPherson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to mention, based on Chadell's comment earlier, if you hold back on the over programming until that original set of scores is done, that might be one way to try and address that when the scores finally come out. And then secondly, I think if applicants have a better understanding of where those modal targets are, both at the modal level and then at the subcategory level, I think that'll give us a better target to shoot for. Maybe that's the wrong word, but as you start to set up that list of where the projects are and you start to determine maybe where that cutoff line is for a certain subcategory, that might help us as well as far as the ties go. I know there were a couple of them. We were one of them. We had one of the tied projects. So we understood that, but maybe some of these other recommendations will kind of kill two birds with one stone. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Anybody else on this one? All right, we got 7 minutes before we really start losing people, Joe.
So this is for scoring appeals, and the solicitation language doesn't really provide a lot of direction on scoring appeals, and I think that's something going into 2026 we might want to have more direction on, but we're not going to overhaul that going into 2024. So staff had recommended a more defined process for creating, to be created during the evaluation, but for 2024, providing a response letter to applicants with the committee's determination and allowing for a meeting with the scoring chair and council staff and the applicant. Following that meeting, this would still be a funding and programming decision. So one member last time was at funding and programming was a little concerned that all of a sudden that this small group would make the decision. No, it is still going to be a funding and programming decision. And then also to make sure that after the appeal deadline, no new information can be provided. There was some new information and sort of a change in direction provided last time. And so F&P suggested, and again, I think we were talking about one specific interest that staff could share just how impactful a potential change would impact ranking. And our staff actually pushed back on that for two reasons. One, each measure, I should say, should be scored on its own merit. And two, it's kind of hard to do that at times because of the cost effectiveness score. So one of the appeals last time, I think they were awarded 35 points. And I did say that we don't know what this final score is going to be because we have to do an adjustment for the cost effectiveness score. So that can be difficult to do on the fly and subject to some errors. So I think we have to be careful with that. But that point was taken, I think, that people do want to know their impact, even if in a peer sense they shouldn't. So anyway, any comments on scoring appeals?
All right, seeing no hands on this one, Joe?
The HSIP rule, there was an instance this time around where we had suggested the possibility of a project that had applied both for HSIP and the regional solicitation to receive funding from both. And that seemed like a bit of a logistical mess. And there was definitely some aversion to that. And to the point that some folks even suggested maybe you should only be able to apply for one or the other. Staff recommended to continue to allow application for both solicitations, but to point out that you cannot receive funding from both. You're all going to receive funding from one or the other. And F&P didn't really have anything to say about this. I think people were comfortable with it.
This one makes sense to me. Any other committee members have thoughts on this one? Okay, go ahead, Joe.
Do we still need the limit for bus rapid transit projects? So that rule stating that you can only fund up to $32 million in BRT projects was in place for the last couple of cycles. Usually, not by rule, but usually 25 million would be to the big BRT project that we fund each time. Staff said that because funding amounts can lead to certain rigidity, that perhaps it should be based on the number of projects, like requiring that at least 2 projects not be directly tied to BRT. And funding and planning said that you can consider including LRT along with BRT, though that would be an additional restriction, and there was some concern of how far down with the scoring list we went. So the staff kind of recommends not doing that and just changing that 32 million to from an amount to project funding to numbers of project funded. So requiring that at least 2 projects not directly tied to BRT are funded in the transit categories.
Any committee comments on this one? Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Joe, I think you're well aware of the background on this. It's the STA has concerns around removing the limit. I think we're open to some discussion around this, but just as it stands right now, STA would likely be against removing this limit, but open to discussions.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody else in their staff has a comment on how the sort of changing to requiring projects not tied to BRT would offset that. But it's meant to do that to an extent.
Okay. Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think this should be done for this next cycle. I'm not against talking through it, but the amount of effort it took to set this rule was months and 1,000 meetings, and it got very political. And so I think there needs to be more discussion about it.
That's a good point.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead, Joe. I see no more hands.
3 more, and I think we should be able to get through it almost by 11. So currently, applicants are required to state that they will maintain facilities by removing snow, and that's sort of a requirement that is stated in the process. And I don't think too many agencies have a hard time with that on roads. But we did establish a little more of a statement that we will do so via letter for the for winter maintenance requiring trail facilities in the trails and bike category, and we're suggesting that be included, extended to roadway categories for any trails and sidewalks being funded under that. And members didn't seem to have a lot to say about this. They seem comfortable with it at funding and programming.
Okay. Makes sense to me. I see no hands up. Go ahead, Joe.
So the bridge target, as you might recall, we set we had a rigid amount that we almost backed us into a corner about 3 cycles ago. So then we ended up with a $10 million bridge target, and MnDOT has indicated that we should not assume that new on-system bridge program that we got some funding for last year is going to continue. But we do recommend that if it does continue, that we expand eligibility downward for other federal aid eligible bridges, that is on-system bridges, for the 2024 cycle, not to include freeways. This expanded eligibility would include major, minor collectors, and what we used to know as B minors for urban areas. Members seemed comfortable with this approach, but again, this would only apply if we continue to get the on-system bridge program funding.
And Joe, are we expected to know that, like, for the 2024 solicitation, the answer to that question?
Good question. Hope Steve knows.
Yeah, thanks. And just briefly, the money that we use for on-system bridge was a transfer from the general fund. So we likely won't know until a new bill would be signed. And so when, our PUW committee, which Joe McPherson and some others were on, we talked about making this change last summer in a future cycle so that we were capturing the worst bridges on our system. That's the intent of the money. But we likely won't know going into 2024 cycle. But we'll, if it were to continue, we'd probably backfill it with this on-system bridge money. If not, we'll just fund it out of our normal SDP money. It's about the same amount of money. So it's about $4.5 million per year that we were getting for on-system bridge. So this is, like I said, kind of hedging our bet a little bit.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense to me. Any other committee members have questions or comments on this one? Seeing none, Joe, let's move along.
Oh, okay. So a minimum point value. We get this comment a lot. Some folks want to see either a minimum point value, you have to score at least 500 points, or you have to score at least X percentage of whatever the top scoring project is in a category. I think some people had some lower ranking or lower scoring projects getting funded, and it really sort of took some people by surprise. But we do caution that it's nearly impossible to compare scores across project scores across categories for a couple of reasons. One, in some categories that are a little more quantitative heavy, you'll see a lot of higher scores in general. There's times where everybody scores at least 80% in some categories. And another piece is, of course, one outlier or one big project, or one big score or two big scores, say in roadway strategic capacity, can really lower the total overall scores versus no outliers in roadway reconstruction and modernization. So at 500 points in one category would be a good project, whereas it would be a mediocre project in another category. So a point number is really hard to do, and even a point percentage, I think, is an inexact way to determine that. But there's remains a lot of momentum for it. So we're recommending no change in 24, and that we could really look into how to make a sound statistical rationale to do it in 2026. Even so, I think, I think to make that determination, we need the time that's allotted in the regional solicitation evaluation. And F&P members, a number of them agree with that and said a designated line could be kind of arbitrary and could discount viable projects in entire hands. So a lot of thought needs to go through it. And then that outliers, like I mentioned, can lead to inconsistent scoring ranges category by category.
Go ahead, Elaine.
Another point I think I would add on to this is this last round we had a lot more money, so it allowed us to go further down the projects lists, and so that got to the lower scoring, which was not a typical situation of having that many funds. So this next round we would not go as far down those lists again as we did this last year.
So I would go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Steve, do you know off the top of your head what we're looking at for a projection as far as funding available for 24?
I do. Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair and Joe. So I think we'll be at a base level about 250 million.
Okay, so still an uptick from 2020.
Yeah, somewhere in between where we used to be, and last year was, we ended up at 355 million after overprogramming and carbon reduction protect. So it'll be 250 plus overprogramming, and then the outstanding kind of questions are protect and carbon reduction. So
10-4, thanks.
Yep.
Go ahead, Scott.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I guess I would just say for this item, back to the performance measure thing again, I think instead of looking at the points, if we ever do get to the point of actually using performance measures and regional targets to inform our investments, I think that would be probably a better way to determine the cutoff lines. Just like, for instance, if we had a lower overall scoring safety project, but we're not meeting our safety targets, we might want to fund more safety projects that score lower as opposed to another category that is performing better regionally with its target data. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. I would just, as part of our application process, there's qualifying criteria. So every application that goes in and gets scored is assumed to be eligible for the funding. And we all know that all our projects are good projects, right? So there's also some differences in scoring, just with different, it's not consistent. There's many different scores working on this. I think this one's very challenging, and I support where funding and programming landed on this one. So, all right. Any other comments? Otherwise, Joe, do we have one more?
No, we have two more. But I don't think they shouldn't be too long. So the Regional Bicycle Transportation Network, every year we get some people asking if changes can be made, and given the time period, we're looking at an open period of about 3 to 4 weeks, 5 weeks to receive requests for administrative adjustments, and people didn't really have any concerns with it. They did ask for clarification on what those administrative adjustments are. So those 3 bullets you see there were not on the slide at funding and programming. So those are the administrative adjustments that we're looking at. It's alignment designations within existing corridors, minor extensions, and minor alignment and quarter center line shifts. So we'll be opening up a process for that in the future, the near future, but not looking to overhaul any RBTN, the RBTN. That will happen before 2026, I assume.
I would maybe add a comment that communities can already continually ask for these administrative adjustments. So we will promote that 3-week window to make sure people are aware of it if they have it, but they can already be asking for those changes.
True.
That's good to know.
As part of the regular process.
Okay. I see no hands. Let's go to the next one.
This is a slide that we did not have at funding and programming. And it's just a reminder of what the federal minimum and maximums are. And I think we got feedback somewhere to at least run this by the committees and see if there's any concerns or thoughts about changing those. We haven't heard, I don't think we've heard anything specific, but here they are.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's worth at least broaching this subject, talking about it. I think we're all up against the reality that inflation is among us, and our projects we're seeing at that level, and I don't foresee that coming down the next 2 to 3 years here. So I'd at least be interested in talking about this again. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. Anyone else? I tend to agree with Joe as well. I think this is worth a conversation. Maybe funding and programming could dig into this. They didn't have this slide or talk about this at their committee. So, all right. I know we've lost a number of members. We're at the end of our presentation. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone, for hanging on. Are there any agency announcements before we wrap up today?
Actually, one thing I wanted to mention, April Crockett had put in a comment in the chat about TAB had had a discussion on whether to set aside some of the federal funding for any upcoming IIJA regional type projects, depending on what comes through with guidance of what can be funded. And is there any thoughts from this group on that? I mean, we can discuss it again at the next meeting too. And TAB did ask MnDOT to ask their consultant if they could come to TAB to present on this too. So just to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Seems like a kind of a big item that maybe we should tee up for maybe next month with the committee. So, yeah. Okay. Steve, you had your hand up and you put it down. You good?
I was going to mention the same thing that Elaine did. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. All right. Seeing no other business, we will be adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone who hung on. I know we went a little long.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yes.